Right, everybody. So, our usual start, just nice and easy and gently to loosen yourself up a bit, get the blood and the energy flowing, and warm up, raise your body temperature, but also to give yourself time and space to settle in to a sort of familiar sort of atmosphere, familiar place that we begin to associate with arts like Tai Chi. And I think this kind of mindset, I suppose you could call it, or however you think of it, is one of the things that gradually builds for us with the practice, and in many ways is the sort of foundation, the landscape within which we build the movement, we progress in the movements, we discover more. So it takes us a little bit beyond just the physical movements. So it partly depends on how long you've been doing Tai Chi, but only partly, because I think we start to get a glimpse of those sort of qualities, that landscape, whether we've just started in Tai Chi or whether we've been doing it for ages. And on the other hand, it's possible that you've been doing this for ages and never really gone beneath the surface of the movement. If you get too caught up with this is how this movement is done, and the next movement is done like this. So we need to find a balance. I've seen Tai Chi described as a middle path, and we want to be able to see various aspects of it. My first teacher, Bron Min Hip Kin, used to say to us that there were three aspects to Tai Chi. She called them the three M's. It was a meditation, it was a martial art, and it also had a medical aspect, the health aspect. And she used to sort of teach that all of those were important. I've kind of formed a view that those three aspects of it are a bit like the legs of a tripod, that we want to be able to engage in one way or another with all of those elements. I mean, you might have a particular interest. You'd be coming to Tai Chi for a particular reason. It's a very accessible exercise for many people. And yet, if we regard it just as an exercise, we can overlook that element of the mind and both the benefits for the mind and the influence of our minds on what we're doing, and so on and so forth, and miss the sort of holistic quality of it. If we say it as a meditation and we're not particularly interested in martial arts, I'm not suggesting nobody has to go out and practice it as a martial art, but there's elements within the martial side of it, the way that we adapt to forces acting on our body, that sense of internal strength, and so on and so forth, that are really important for our health. And, I mean, there's many other ways in which these things cross over with each other. So we find ways in to the art, and at that point we can begin to explore. And those of you who are fairly new to the art, in particular, I would say don't concern yourself if I say things or things happen that you don't quite understand or that don't seem relevant. They may become relevant at some point. But on the other hand, you'll also get insights into the movements as you come to them with a fresh mind, an open mind. And like looking out over a landscape, you might not be able to identify every tree, but that doesn't stop you engaging with the landscape, shall we say. So that space that we come into, that landscape that we come into, has many different facets to it. and it gradually builds. And within that, we start to understand very subtle changes in the body. We start to understand our responses to those changes, start to get a sense of the movement, the energy, and so on and so forth, and how these practices can be of practical use to us. So the routine helps us to come into the landscape, weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back, and with that sense of just coming very gently more upright. I've said to a few groups from the shop, I said to you directly last week about the alignment of your head. If I come a bit closer, just to carry on, but there, I keep looking, I can't look and show the head at the same time. So the chin pulls back, and that is sometimes misinterpreted as a sort of downward movement. So what happens is, it's like your head rolls on the shoulders, and there's a slight straightening of the spine in the back of, in the top of the neck, top 2 or 3 vertebrae. The occipital ridge lifts, and the crown of your head comes to the top of the body, and your line of sight is very slightly angled downwards. Again, one of my early teachers used to describe it as though you're standing on a hill looking down into a valley, or looking out over a valley. I think of it more as standing by the sea and looking at the horizon, just slightly angled downwards. And so between our hips dropping and that sort of lift through the back of our head, just feeling a lot slightly longer feeling through your back and your spine. And with that, almost a draining down. If you can imagine the feel of, if you're standing in the shower, the feel of water as it drains over your body, it's almost like that within your body as tightness and stiffness starts to release. This kind of melting away, dissolving away of some of the areas that are blocked. And then, of course, the awareness of that other feeling, when tightness goes a little bit, when there's less stiffness in our shoulders, the realization that there is this support from within the body, however you care to think about it, structural, energetic, all of those things. And we start to move with a sense of that strength, that inner strength. So rather than this exercise being your arms swinging around, which is often what we see first, what we tend to do first, we're aware that through that strength and the connection that goes with it, our hips and our waist are involved, and so on and so forth. All sorts of ways in which you'll understand and observe these things. Don't wait for me to tell you what I think you should be aware of. I just throw out ideas to help you come to your own understanding. So with this exercise, turn your hands palm out, leave them hanging down. I'll bump into the wall if I don't come forward. And then very slowly raise them up till your hands are just below your shoulders, and just to slowly lower them down. And notice the sensations in your sides and your back as you do this. Try not to stiffen up in your shoulders, so leave your elbows hanging down. Notice the difference it makes. And that's a non-judgmental thing. If it just don't think, oh, it should be kind of like a good difference. It might be that you suddenly feel that the movement's not as good for you, not as smooth. That's fine. And then just hold your arms there for a few moments. And let your hands drop. And then swaying in the river, easing forwards and backwards. it's quite difficult to maintain a focus of attention. Our thoughts naturally drift away. You get distracted by noises and events outside, by our own thoughts inside, and so on. And our minds are, or should be, hopefully, quite active. So we don't want to block that process. We don't want to try and look for a sort of hard, single-pointed concentration, because that becomes quite tiring. But rather what we want to try and do is just to bring our attention back whenever we realize we've drifted off. And so a key feature of that inner landscape is like a sort of clearing in the middle of the woods, or however you think of it, something that you come back to, and something you gradually become aware is still there, even when you're half a mile away struggling through the brambles or something like that. So it becomes a kind of anchor point, a point that you can orientate yourself from and return to when you need to. So again, this is a good exercise, a simple exercise. We don't get distracted by, oh, is it left or right? Which may happen, particularly for those of you less familiar with the exercises, with some of the later exercises. On the other hand, those of you more familiar with this will think, oh, it's this one again. And then you start planning what you're going to have for lunch, or what you're doing this afternoon, or whatever. So see if you can just return your attention and maybe focus on one part of your body, your spine or your hips or your fingertips, just to notice what's going on there. And then coming slightly forwards, but let your hips drop back and rooting down. So now it's a vertical movement with your feet sinking into the floor. Try and feel every now and then this sense of dropping, kind of feeling you might get if you're carrying a bag and you just put it down and suddenly realize, oh, it's really pulling on the shoulder, but you kind of not noticed it. It won't happen every time you think. As you settle into the movement and all that's involved in it, particularly the hips dropping back, you will notice that hopefully occasionally. And your body grows out of, expands out of the root, like a plant growing from its root. Another thing that we commonly do is we speed up. I don't want you to go so slow that it's a painful experience. You want to keep that sense of the flow. But having arrived at a point where it's comfortable, just notice if you are sort of beginning to hurry a little bit. And again, just remind yourself that we don't need to do that. Now this time, change to the wild goose. So again, the images can be very useful, but we need to be careful not to get distracted by it. I'm very fond of the wild goose, but I like to go bird watching. So if I'm not careful, I think, oh yeah, geese, maybe it's time I went somewhere and saw some wild geese, and that's a complete distraction. So sometimes the images are helpful, but try not to get so caught up in them that they dominate the movement. You can play with the ideas outside of the actual practice of the exercise. Every now and then, just check your posture. Weight forwards, hips dropping back. Soften your knees and your hips. And that slight sense of your chin pulling backwards and the lift through the crown of your head. And then change to Heart in the Clouds. As your arms come up, imagine somebody just very gently pressing down on your shoulders. So there's less temptation to strain in the shoulders and to find a different mechanism for moving your arms, one that's a little bit less driven by our normal habits, perhaps. Again, that takes us into the realm of those inner connections and the inner strength, the flow of the movement. One more time. And then go back to rooting down, doing the 3 in a sequence. This really exposes that tendency to hurry, because it's as though we get to one movement and then just very quickly feels as though we need to change. Focusing on the details of the movement is a useful thing. Heart in the Clouds follows the movement all the way around until the hands meet again in front of your belly. The rooting down starts with your palms turning up and then the push from your legs. And all the way down again until you press the ball down into the water. The wild goose starts with your hands coming out and again your feet pushing down. And they go from about a point just above your shoulders to about level with your hips. And then we go back into Part in the Clouds. So just be aware of where one movement will change to another. And try and complete each movement at a nice steady pace, without feeling the need that somehow you're going to be left behind or you have to do the next movement in a hurry. And then do one more round of this. Take your time. The next move is going to be our usual movement. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So if you're a little bit behind, or you feel you're a little bit behind, it's not like you're going to be suddenly confronted with a movement that you've never met before. This time, letting your hands drop all the way down to your sides. Feel the weight of your hands and your arms on your shoulders, and then push up. And again, giving yourself a chance to complete not just each movement, but each stage of the movement. Gentle push down through your feet, perhaps a little bit of push up in your hips, expansion through the side of your body, wrapping your fingers around and rotating, pulling down, feeling your elbow drop, drawing your hand down, your arm reaching its full length and your fingers unfolding, and then switching to the other side and starting the whole process over again. Again, don't see a kind of shift of your awareness away from that as a huge mistake. It's just about being human. It's very natural for us to do that. But again, just gently redirect your attention when that happens. One more on each side. And then pushing in 4 directions. Notice as you come back that your hands just for a moment come out to your sides and then back into the middle. One more round. And then circling palms. Excuse me. And then if it's comfortable, you add the turn. And then on the other side. And again, if it's comfortable for you, return. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Remember, not straining to come upright, but rather focusing on that feeling of your hips dropping back and the connections from hips and lower back to shoulders and head. Feel that through your muscles, through your spine. Maybe use one of the images like the pulley cords from hips to shoulders. Whichever suits you best. One more time. And then just give yourself a moment in the standing position. And shake out. So that idea of, if you like, coming back to the clearing or whatever metaphor, whatever image you use for it, it's a very simple idea, but it's far from easy. And obviously relates to Tai Chi as a meditation and relates to other meditational arts like mindfulness and so on. And actually that difficulty doesn't seem to go away. If what I've seen from other sort of like people who practice these kind of arts, people with far more experience and insight into these things than me, it's a constant factor. It's just about being human. What can change is how we work with that. How I describe it is wrong. It's very hard to describe, but we have to start somewhere. Any way of describing it is sooner or later going to be insufficient. But I've kind of been describing it as either or. You're either in the clearing or you're in the middle of the woods. After a while, we realise it's not quite like that. That there is always a kind of undercurrent, as it's described in the Tai Chi writings, that we seek the stillness within the movement. We tend to think very black and white, either or, but in fact, you know, the mindset, if you like, for these arts, part of the landscape is that there isn't an either or. So that eventually that sense of space, stillness, the clearing kind of stays with you even when you're moving. There'll still be an emphasis on where the focus of your attention is, but it starts to underpin the whole practice. And we see that, I think, in the quality of the movements. The movements themselves have a kind of still quality about them. People often say that, you know, kind of like their first experience of Tai Chi can be a very profound one. And they say people report back all sorts of things. I think, well, how can that be? You're meant to practice for half your life before you realise that. But of course, there is something about the atmosphere, the feel of Tai Chi. Even people sometimes watching, they say, I feel better for watching, sort of thing, because it points us at a different mode, if you like, a different way of being. And all of those are significant in Tai Chi. It still doesn't become easy, but if you find that, well, it doesn't really work when you separate out that stillness from the movement, you're absolutely right. Sometimes we want to focus on one or the other to kind of help us to build both well, but in the end they should mesh. So transferring your weight from side to side, and in practice, I think it's a useful tool to say to yourself, well, at certain points, I'm going to focus on this, that, or the other. And in terms of that stillness, that space, then it's quite useful to have points in the movement where there is that, oh yeah, that's where it is. There's that recognition. And earlier I was saying about recognizing where one movement changes to another. And they can be quite useful reference points, as can the transfer of your weight. So think about your posture. You could have your feet pointing straight forwards. Interestingly, sometimes that suits me, but I noticed today my feet are slightly turned out. What you don't want is your feet right out there like that. But a slight angle can be useful. It helps to open up the hip, stops the muscles around hips and buttocks tightening. And rather than thinking left, right, left, right, left, right, think sort of transfer the weight, sink. Transfer the weight, sink. So we begin to associate that draining away within the body, that sense of dropping through the body, the rooting down, with a moment of just resting, shall we say. And then turning. And I suggest you mirror my movement. I would suggest you use my your right hand. I'm going to use my left hand. Bring the hand around, let it come up, like you're painting the circle. Your arm will rotate, and it will rotate in response to maintaining a sense of space, particularly in your shoulder joint. So if I do this and I get to here, this is actually quite tight. My response to the tightness is to flow around it, like water flows around a rock. And that quality of yielding is very characteristic of Tai Chi. Not meeting resistance head on, but rather like water flowing around the rock. There's a lovely line in very old Chinese sort of philosophical text, the Tao Te Ching, where it says that the sea will always flow back from the cliff, and yet in time the sea will always wear the cliff away. At the same time, we might want to think, well, hold on, what am I doing with my shoulder? There might be a more incisive quality that we want to bring to the practice as well. Now change to your left hand. So, you might want to think, well, what am I doing here that's creating that tightness? Can I loosen it in some way or something like that? So sometimes the water will flow back. Sometimes it will seep into a crack. Try not to let your hand and your arms speed up. The speed of the movement is governed by the speed of your weight transfer and the turning of your center. Now both hands together. It's always very tempting to allow your hands to overtake the rest of your body. Again, we can think of this in several stages. We can move the weight across, and as we sink more into the leg, that's when we turn and we rotate the ball, and we move the weight across, and then we sink in, rotating the hips, change the hands over. And again, by focusing on those stages, we become better at noticing them, and after a while you notice that they do in fact overlap and blend at the edges. So once again, it's not an either-or situation. So wave hands like clouds. You can either look over your hand, so again you're looking out towards the horizon, or you can focus your attention on your top hand. Now that's quite interesting because now as your hands change over, there's a slight change in focus. And again here, and it's said to just very gently work the muscles of your eyes that are involved in focusing the lens. So there's quite complex around the eye. So some people say that this is quite good for your eyesight when you do it this way. And then just let your hands drop down. Shake it. 1 foot forwards. So again, transfer and sink. Transfer and sink. Another element you can build into this particular exercise that I find quite useful is the idea of just pushing the foot into the floor a little bit. And I've talked about that before, that you push in as though you're just standing on soft sand and you're just pushing in to find the firmer base underneath. So it's not you're not straining, leave your toes soft, the arch of your foot soft. But you can do that just before you move the weight. So you go back, for instance, you sink, you settle in, push gently through the front foot, and sometimes you get a sense for the weight following that movement. Toes and heel starting to lift. And this is where that little push in becomes useful. You can turn the front foot out a little bit more for this, because it really means that before you move the weight, and in a few moments before you take the step, you're really establishing your foundation, your root. and then stepping in. And shake out. On the other side. Raising your toes and your heel. And then step in. And then depending on where you've got the space, if you've got the space, take a few steps either forwards or backwards. Try not to bump into anything and start breaking things. Okay, shake out. One foot forwards again. Sink your weight back, hold your hands over your belly. Pigeon spreads its wings. Notice how your rib cage and your back open and close alternately. And then sit back, and this time don't move your weight, but just let the front of your body open, your ribs open, go forwards. Imagine a curve in front of you. There's a kind of wall there that curves out and back. So feel how the transfer of your weight and all those other things happening link up. This, I suppose, makes explicit that opening and closing in the chest, a bit like pigeon spreads its wings, and how that movement within your body has a direct influence on your arms. So then this time, don't curve your arms out, just let them come straight back, but see if you can retain a little bit of that feeling of opening and closing, still working to help to move your arms. The shoulder, very smooth movement down through your arms, elbows soft, wrists soft, the joints of your fingers soft. And then pushing a wave or pushing the boat. Again, just remind yourself, hips sinking down, soften your knees. That's like pulling of your chin, lengthening in your back. There's a good ways of bringing your attention back to something a little bit deeper, less concerned with what the arms are doing, something that points you again at that quieter, stiller quality. Then on the other side, pigeon spreads its wings. Changing. So when we change, now instead of the chest opening as we go forwards, it's closing as we go forward. So none of these things are sort of set in stone. They're all just different ways of looking at it. And as much as anything else, it's our minds that can actually begin to stimulate the differences. We're not one-way creatures, only able to do one thing in a particular way. We have choices. And sometimes we're not even aware we're making those choices, of course. Sometimes it's, oh, we're changing from this exercise to this exercise, that image to this image. then change. And change. And then we're going to do Wind Blows the Willows, and we'll add some stepping in to that. That can get quite complicated. And so what I want you to do, if or when you get a bit, oh, what's going on? Is it this leg or is it that hand or whatever? Then rather than staying with that question, see if you can come back to that inner feeling, that quietness, that stillness, whatever, however you label it, however you imagine it, however you find is a good way to access it. So in the moment of asking that question, bring your attention back to that space. And I'm not saying forget about the question, it might be a relevant question, but see if you can view it from that perspective rather than, oh, I've got to sort out my arms or whatever. So I'm going to stand back a little bit because when we step, I'm going to go forwards first of all and then back, but work it out for yourself. So I'm going to start with my left foot forwards, sinking back. So first of all, just Wind Blows the Willows. Begin to raise your toes and your heel. Stepping in. Shake out. And then on your other side, so your right foot forwards. Remember, take your time, settle your weight and turn. A lot of the problems come when we go too quickly. So I've got to turn, I've got to turn. Wait until you settle. Find that sense of the ground beneath your feet. Let that help with the turn. At the same time now, begin to raise your toes and your heel. Same time as the turn. Begin to step. So you step in, maybe even slightly before you turn. Go forward, you sink down. You begin to turn a little bit and that raises your heel, but you bring the foot in so that you've got a good base for the turn. So now when we make the transition to Dragonfly Skims the water, you've already started moving the foot. So step, go forwards, and then start the whole process again once you start to settle in to the foot you just moved into. Whether you're stepping forwards or backwards, it doesn't make any difference. I'm going to do one more in this direction before I go back. Now step back, plant the foot, move the weight, turn, raise the toes, complete the turn once the foot is in, and then I can take the step. And then bring your feet back. Good. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. Your back. Around your hips. Your belly, and then the upper part. Then, as always, to finish, embrace tiger, return to mountain. Don't hurry, pushing up, wrapping your arms around, drawing in, just feeling yourself quite naturally, hopefully, coming back to that beginning point, that settled point. And then equally naturally, there's a change that we start to push out again. So it's really a very natural rhythm for us. And once again, stand. Check out. Thank you very much once again, everybody. Thank you for joining in. I hope that was useful to you. And hopefully.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.